want to welcome you all to the Presidential Lecture Series. We have a very special program for you today. Siva Vaidhyanathan is with us. He's a cultural historian and an expert on media. He's the Robertson Professor for Media Studies at UVA, where he directs the Center for Media and Citizenship. He's published 6 books on technology, society, and the law, including Anti-Social Media. You got to get this book. Anti-Social Media, How Facebook Disconnects Us and Undermines Democracy. We'll be talking about the book a little bit today. Welcome to Brooklyn College, Siva.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Yeah,
it's very nice to have you here.
Yeah, likewise.
So let's set the stage for where we are today. Today is Tuesday, October 15th. We are exactly 21 days away from a presidential election with Vice President Kamala Harris running against former President Donald Trump. And I want to begin with an event that's related to the presidential election. Brooklyn College sits in a neighborhood called Little Haiti, home to one of the largest Haitian communities in the United States. And everyone probably remembers this. In early September, a woman posted on Facebook about a neighbor's missing cat and a rumor that Haitian immigrants were abducting and eating neighbors' pets. There was no basis to this claim. And yet it was amplified on X by J.D. Vance, by Elon Musk, and then Donald Trump himself mentioned it during the presidential debate. As a result, Springfield, Ohio suffered 33 bomb threats. There were white supremacists who coalesced on the community. There were evacuations and lockdowns of schools and hospitals. And I thought that this experience, this example, gave us an opportunity to really think about the relationship between social media and democracy. So I wonder if you could take us through the analysis.
I mean, my mind first goes to the relationship between the United States and Haiti, and it reminds me that any time that people without a stake or background with Haiti start thinking and talking about Haiti in this country, nothing good comes of it. We have a terrible history of our relationship with Haiti, and the specter of Haiti in the American mind is ugly. It is it's poisoned by all sorts of myths and lies and misunderstandings, right? So it's an easy Haiti and people from Haiti, people in Haiti, become an easy target for to contain fears. Right, and to distill fears. And that's essentially what we're seeing here. But the dynamic that you're describing, where somebody we've never heard of and probably has no particular influence posts something, and people with more influence relay it, amplify it, morph it in a game of telephone through all of the different elements of our media system to the point where on a national network, a person who used to be president, who has the largest stage in the world, repeated some element or some version of the original story. When that happens, there's no containing it, and there's no even adequate response to it, right? To say it's not true renders it a function of the truth-false axis, which is not really where it's operating. Like, it doesn't matter to the people who are spreading it what is true. What matters is that it sparks a feeling. And I think we make a mistake when we think about these dynamics, and we see it in so many different areas, from anti-Semitism to anti-Black racism to misogyny, all of these different areas where a character or a people are misrepresented and then their stories amplified through a chain. We tend to forget that this is an emotional machine that we're watching. It's a machine driven by feelings, by fears and hatreds, by desires. And when we try to respond, that's not true. That's just not the world in which any of this is operating. And so I've been really concerned over the years since I published this book that our response to these moments has been flat, has been without a real sense of what's at stake, and has been involved in trying to fact check rather than supplement or replace these moments with different stories, different feelings, different emotions.
So let's get to that. We'll circle back to this story because it's so important. But I want to kind of backtrack and talk about Facebook. What does it do well?
Yeah.
And then what does it not do well? Because I think that's really behind the story here, or it's a part of the story.
Yeah. Well, look, Facebook is the biggest example of a series of platforms that we have in our lives, from TikTok to Instagram, X/Twitter to some degree, although it's not long for this world, and a number of others, right, around the world. WeChat is the largest one in the People's Republic of China, for instance, and they all operate under some basic principles, that they are attention grabbing and holding systems, and they benefit from grabbing and maintaining our attention and creating kind of an itch in our mind that makes us want to return to them. And they're engineered to do this, which if you are, from the company's point of view, it makes sense, right? It keeps people engaged, hooked, coming back to it. From the point of view of what we get out of it, we get a little bit of affirmation. We get a little bit of a good feeling every once in a while, just a little dose, right? Oh, someone liked my joke.
A little hit of dopamine.
Yeah, a little hit of dopamine. Somebody liked my picture. Somebody liked my joke. Somebody wished me a happy birthday.
Yeah.
And that's why we all got onto these systems, to be wished happy birthday and wish others happy birthday. That's the great reward, and in many ways, the greatest value of these systems. But of course, we ended up applying these systems to all areas of life because we don't live in these discrete functions of you only say happy birthday to somebody. You also talk about sports and religion and politics and identity and your frustrations and your joys. And so because we've now put so much of our storytelling and our emotional exposition through these systems, they are also undergoing the same amplification processes as what would be beneficial and largely harmless, which is, what I say in the book, puppies and babies, which is what we really are there for, right? So
that's the good part, the
right,
puppies
the
and
part,
babies.
Right. Or our chief motivation. I mean, there are lots of other good things come from these interactions and relationships, but a lot of terrible things can be amplified just as easily, especially by those who knowingly exploit how these systems are designed. And we've seen that from authoritarians, and we've seen that from hate groups, and we've seen that from people who are just troublemakers and trolls, who just want to cause trouble in the world.
Yeah, let's talk about the 2016 election.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about Facebook's influence. I don't think we fully understood it at the time,
right.
but now we have a lot more information about how Facebook affected the outcome potentially of that election.
So I think it's a mistake to assume that Facebook was the most powerful instrument of propaganda. It was an instrument of propaganda for the Trump campaign in 2016. And as it was for the Brexit campaign in early 2016, as it was for the election of Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines in early 2016. All of those things happened in 2016 along similar lines with similar divides in a society, similar levels of fear and anxiety expressed through those various elections. So this, of course, is not a U.S. story. I actually think that the playbook for all of this was established in 2014 by the BJP in India, Narendra Modi's first major campaign for prime minister. And he used Facebook really effectively in two ways. One, Facebook lowers search costs to find like-minded people. So if you want to find someone who might share an idea with you or a goal with you, it's super easy. It's designed to find people, and Facebook will find them for you. And it does it two ways. There's what you might think of as what Facebook calls the organic way, which is just through the various lattice of connections that you have. Or there's a way you can actually use their advertising platform. And this is really what the Trump campaign did brilliantly, and I think this gets lost in the story. Because it's not just about Russian propaganda. I actually think that's pretty minimal. And it's not just about the varieties of hate speech, and that's pretty minimal. The thing that the Trump campaign figured out about Facebook that the Clinton campaign did not figure out is that it had changed between 2012, when Obama used Facebook effectively, and 2016. And one of the ways that it changed is that it instigated this new system through its advertising platform called lookalike audiences. So let's say the Trump campaign has a rally in Tulsa and it has 10,000 people show up. That means they're able to get 10,000 people to register through the Trump website. By registering, you give them your email address. Now, the Trump campaign has 10,000 email addresses. They're fresh, they're live, they're good, and they're people who are clearly motivated to go hear Trump speak. So these are people they definitely want active in the campaign. And that's good, and that's classic, right? Gather emails, that's what campaigns do. But it goes beyond that, because now they can take that 10,000, put it in a spreadsheet, upload it to Facebook, and create what's called a lookalike audience that can now generate a list of 100,000 Facebook profiles that all share some attributes with those 10,000. Because Facebook has so much data about what we like, what we buy, how we vote, how we worship, et cetera. So now all of a sudden they have 100,000 people who kind of think the same way. Then they can break that down by voting district, by state, by congressional district, and target those people to get them to go knock on doors, to get them to give $10, $25, whatever. So I know that's kind of wonky, but the essence of it is the Trump campaign knew how to exploit how Facebook works and did so in a really deft and powerful way, to the point where Trump's digital campaign manager basically said it was Facebook that won the election for us. But again, it wasn't because it was a direct outlet of propaganda. It was much more because it was about finding like-minded people and motivating them to go to rallies, to get out the vote, to get their neighbors to vote. And all it took was to flip fewer than 100,000 votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, right? It was actually closer to 80,000 votes across those three states, when the University of Michigan football stadium holds 110,000 people.
Wow.
So like it's almost nobody decided that election, right? And so they did that. They did the motivation, especially targeted in states where they were on the bubble. They could have won those states, and they ended up barely winning them. But the other thing they did was lower motivation for potential Clinton voters. And in this case, we have Haitian Americans coming back into this story. There were, Florida. Trump won Florida, I think, by 110,000 votes, like almost nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And Florida has a large number of voters of Haitian descent. And one of the things that the Trump campaign did was directly target ads to Florida voters, especially Florida voters who exhibited some sort of affiliation with Haiti, most likely Haitian Americans, reminding them that Bill Clinton had gone down to Haiti after the previous earthquake and promised all sorts of improvements and delivered almost nothing. So having this sort of, hey, remember how the Clintons let you down story, maybe it demotivated 1,000 or 2,000 people who might have voted for Clinton not to vote at all.
Still, that matters.
And it all adds up. So and it costs almost nothing on Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? The cost to do that is almost nothing. So, and even if it only moved 100 or 200 voters, that's still part of the 110,000 that flipped Florida for Trump.
So I have two questions. Well, let's continue with this because it's so interesting. We're 8 years down the line from 2016. Elon Musk owns X and has sided entirely with the Trump campaign, was out on the stump with Donald Trump a couple days ago. And as I understand it, he has the largest following on X. Some people who are on X, though, say that it's almost impossible to unfollow him, that he'll just refollow. Have you refollow him. Anyway, and he is circulating information, obviously, on Donald Trump's side. Yeah. Is this more of the same, or are we seeing something different in terms of how social media is being used today in the national campaign?
So I think it's different in a couple ways. One, X/Twitter hardly matters anymore. It really never mattered that much, and it matters a lot less now. Yeah, Musk has many millions of followers, but many of those are either fake accounts or they are accounts of people who are just following him but not necessarily checking in or caring.
And I guess some are involuntary follows.
They're involuntary, but it's more latent, right? Yeah. Twitter's active users has plummeted since Musk took over the site. So that he has followers doesn't mean that anyone's actually reading or caring what he pumps out there. But also, remember, Musk's role in this is not as an instigator, but really only as an amplifier. And so he is retweeting noxious stuff. He's not actually coming up with much on his own.
Yeah.
And he's commenting on it and promoting it.
But that's amplification.
It's something, but I'm not too concerned about the potential effects of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Largely because it's people who already buy into that worldview who are really into what he says.
Yeah.
So it's more motivational to them, an affirmation for them than persuasive to anybody. I really am not worried about the persuasive power of any of this. I worry about Elon Musk for a very different reason, and it has nothing to do with X or Twitter. It has a lot more to do with SpaceX, his rocket company, and the fact that he controls a whole flurry of satellites around the world that govern internet service to vast parts of the earth, increasingly fast-growing areas of Africa. Fast-growing areas of Africa where China is trying to establish political dominance. He controls much of the internet traffic in Ukraine, and he's very close to Russian interests. And he is increasingly controlling a lot of the internet access in the United States and Canada and Australia and other places where there are not concentrated communities that can justify the kind of terrestrial internet service that we all enjoy in a city, for instance. SpaceX is a major defense contractor of the United States. So he has actual power over things that matter.
Yeah.
And he is, of course, now a huge campaign donor to one side, but not the other. Yeah. He's very close to the Chinese government because so many Tesla parts are made in China. He's very close to the new right-wing government in Argentina because it controls a whole lot of lithium mines. There are all these ways that Elon Musk is a dangerous person, and Twitter isn't even in the top 10.
Okay. So let's go back to social media then.
Yeah.
And you've opened up this really important and interesting part of the book, which is the way Facebook operates in other parts of the world, which is very different than how it operates here. Can you talk about free basic service and how Facebook can become, in many parts of, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa, the entire media ecosystem?
That's right. And we've seen that, yes, in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya and Nigeria being two good examples of this, and two of the most important countries in the world, fast-growing, potentially powerful economies, among the most powerful and influential states in Africa. But we've also seen it in Myanmar. We've seen it in Vietnam and Cambodia. We've seen it in the Philippines and Indonesia, where what Facebook started offering around 2006 was this service where if you buy a phone that has this suite of services called Free Basics, Facebook will essentially let you use unlimited service of their products without it being charged against your phone service every month.
Understand, this is so important that you can use Facebook and its suite of different kinds of services without it counting against your minutes.
Right. So for people who are living month to month and week to week and in a cash economy, and they don't have a credit card attached to an AT&T account like what we do in this country, this is really important. So all across the world, people are starting businesses that operate almost entirely through Facebook. They're organizing their lives, their social lives, their economic lives, their financial lives, their family lives through Facebook in ways that we just don't even recognize in this country. And that you would have to include WhatsApp and Instagram on that because those are, of course, owned by the same company. And so in so many parts of the world, Facebook is essentially the entire internet experience for them. It creates a tremendous vulnerability and a major amount of power for Facebook as well. It's easy to exploit. You can see why the military junta in Myanmar used Facebook to generate a lot of hatred against the Rohingya minority and then essentially spark a genocidal campaign against the Rohingya. Because it was so easy. This is why Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines was able to run twice for president.
Well, so slow down and let's talk about what you call the authoritarian playbook.
Right.
And how social media is part of that. Let's play that out.
So Rodrigo Duterte he runs for president of the Philippines in 2016 for the first time. He runs a campaign largely based on the concept that he's going to unleash vigilante justice against drug dealers. So he's going to say, if someone wants to go kill a drug dealer on the street, it's okay with me. Extrajudicial killings are just great. Let's do it. This particular platform was somewhat popular, but it spoke to a larger sense that a lot of people in the Philippines wanted something new, something powerful, very recognizable things, right? Wanted a big, strong boss who was unafraid of offending, unafraid of crossing lines, unafraid of breaking rules, had a certain swagger to him, all that classic stuff that we're way too familiar with in this country. But we saw it really powerfully there. So part of the authoritarian playbook is to present oneself with those themes in a very strong way, targeted to the people who are most likely to fall for that or be excited by that. But the other part of the authoritarian playbook is to harass those who don't.
Okay, so let's slow down. So it's about slicing the populace with the information that Facebook has about them, targeting people who are likely to be sympathetic.
That's right.
And then identifying also those who are political dissidents, journalists, human rights organizations that may oppose your agenda.
And then you turn the two sides against each other. You take your followers and you identify the enemies, right? The person who runs the LGBTQ organization, the person who has just written a story in the newspaper about corruption in your government or in your campaign. And you make that person a target, and then that person's social media world is flooded with threats, flooded with faked photographs in compromising situations, often sexually explicit stuff.
Particularly if they're female.
Particularly if they're female, yes. And or queer, either way. Like huge vulnerability there. You make life miserable for people. And what all that really does is raises a tax on being a public person. And again, not unfamiliar to people in this country who've gone through many of the same things. It's just been extreme in places like the Philippines, where it just becomes impossible to lead a public life, to express yourself, to lead a professional life, and in some cases lead a private life with so much harassment, so many threats. And of course, real violence occurs. And we've seen this in India, where people have been lynched because of rumors spread on social media and the party in power motivating people to go and commit violence. And so we're seeing it around the world. We see it to some degree in this country. I actually think we're getting off easier in this country than we are in many other parts of the world.
Yeah, maybe because there's more different media outlets that we engage with. I mean, I was going to actually mention that, 18 to 24-year-olds spend about 3 hours a day on social media. They get most of their news from social media. They're mostly on Instagram.
Right.
About 76% of them are on Instagram. And they tend to think of Facebook as something for their parents or grandparents.
Sure.
They're not, they're not much on Facebook. And I wonder what do you say to that segment of the population? What do you say to the students to make them care about your analysis of Facebook, how it operates around the world and how it operates in this country?
Well, it's also, first of all, it's important to remember that the story you've just told about who uses Facebook and who doesn't is a North American story.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't reflect the rest of the world. In the rest of the world, people of all ages are on Facebook actively. They must be in some parts of the world, and it's growing, right? So it has more than 3 billion users right now. 3 billion users. There are 8 billion humans. 3 billion of us are on Facebook regularly around the world, right? The largest market for Facebook is, of course, the largest country in the world, India, with 1.2 billion people, 1.3 billion people who live in India. About half of them are on Facebook, but that number goes up every month as more and more people get phone connections in India. So the growth is tremendous. The growth potential is even bigger. It's massive in sub-Saharan Africa. It's massive in Southeast Asia. It's already big in South Asia. There are parts of the world where Facebook has no penetration. China and its satellites largely. Some of the former Soviet states have very little Facebook penetration. Ukraine's interesting because for years, most people in Ukraine used Russian platforms instead of Facebook. After the invasion, people in Ukraine have all rushed to Facebook, so they don't use Russian services anymore. So it's growing everywhere, so that's important, except for here. But if you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook because the data is all collected the same way. You're serving the same company. It runs along some of the same principles. It just operates very differently. I think it's largely benign because it has, it's not facilitated to present so many opportunities for widespread connections and motivations the way that Facebook is. But Mark Zuckerberg's very interested in federating and ultimately merging all of his services.
Really?
Which is why right now, if you're on Instagram, you're likely to see, hey, this person you follow just posted this on Threads, and you're starting to see that on Facebook too. So Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger are all slowly being joined, and you're being encouraged to use all of the above. And look, there are some things like neighborhood groups, for instance, that really only operate on Facebook. So yeah, an 18 to 24-year-old might be able to live without Facebook now, but when that 18 to 24-year-old buys a house in the suburbs, there's a reason to be on Facebook, or there's a reason to be on Facebook for the parent group at a school or a soccer team or something like that.
Yeah. Let's talk for a moment about fake news and how it has evolved. MIT research indicates that false information on social media spreads up to 10 times faster than true information.
Sure.
And you've pointed out in your book that, I think the way you put it is you can't argue with crazy.
Right.
Because it just amplifies crazy,
That's right? That's right.
And I'm wondering about how do we, what do you suggest how do we deal with it? If you can't argue with crazy and you can't respond to fake news, what should we be doing?
Well, first, identify it as crazy and not false, right? So again, like avoid the truth-false axis.
Oh, that's interesting. What's the language that would do that?
Well,
how would you
crazy
do
is not
that?
even the best word, right?
It's not. It's not.
But it has to do with understanding that the very presence and spread of this kind of content serves a need for the people who do spread it. That it's not about persuasion. That it's much more about motivation and emotion. That's a much harder problem to solve, right? What need is it serving? Why do people in a small town in Ohio, and it's actually not the small town in Ohio, but why do the people who pay attention to the small town in Ohio care so much about these rumors about what Haitian immigrants are doing? Well, they care for reasons, very bad reasons, that have to do with their own fears and insecurities. Their own sense of instability,
racism.
Their own sense that their status is slipping in the world. Those are super hard problems to confront. To even acknowledge those problems is uncomfortable because you have to grant some of the worst people in the world some status as feeling humans, right, who have needs. But that is the sad truth, that we are seeing the spread of this stuff around the world because it serves a purpose to give people a sense of belonging, an explanation for why things are difficult in their lives, maybe even a misrepresentation of just how difficult things are.
Yeah.
But it's all about the feelings. It's all about the emotions.
So is it connected to the erosion in a belief in expertise and the scientific method? One of the things that you point out is that it's not just that there is false information rocketing around social media, it's that it makes it hard for us to discern what's true or false. And then it makes people think, well, maybe they're not sure, maybe they don't care. It's this sort of, well, we can't really tell the truth, which is such a terrifying thing.
It is. But think about this. Like, this is a sort of experiment I play with my students. I say, raise your hand if you believe that the climate is changing and human beings are behind it. All the hands in my classroom go up, right? Even people who might not be completely subscribed or too embarrassed to not raise their hand in that moment. But all the hands go up. And then I say, why do you believe that? And they will invariably say, well, because the scientists tell us. And I say, why do you believe scientists? And that's when it goes silent. Why do we believe scientists? Right? If you go deeper, well, there is a reason, right? And I have my own justification. I always have to fill in the blanks at this moment of silence, which is I have been raised and live in a what cultural theorists would call a discursive community, but basically a group of humans who all have offered trust, extended trust, to a set of people who have worked for certain levels of credibility and status in society by virtue of practicing methods that have been tried over time, and it serves us for the most part in most areas of our life, which is why airplanes fly, right, among other things, right? So we trust science for reasons, good reasons, but ultimately there's a leap of faith in that. I trust scientists because I trust scientists. There is at some point something circular about it, and it's because that is what I'm comfortably raised with and live among. You and I are in this community, this discursive community that grants not absolute power to scientists, because we always know, and scientists themselves know better than anybody, that their conclusions are under constant revision and scrutiny. But it's that practice of constant revision and scrutiny that actually gives us faith, right?
Right.
But that's such a long answer.
It is a very unpersuasive answer to many. Not to me, but do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's not something you say to persuade.
Sure.
We haven't developed language.
That's right.
That says this person's not an expert.
Yes.
And can articulate clearly and simply.
But what if you've never bought into that community? What if you were never acculturated to that community or raised in that community like you and I have been, and you have no foundation upon which to trust science, right? And your own experience, and some of the real experiences, might undermine that notion, right? What if you know that your grandparents, your cousins have been served badly by medical science in the past, or been exploited by medical science in the past? You have reason then to doubt certain communities of scientists, maybe all scientists. What if your community has been misrepresented by professional journalists for decades, and you feel like you've been excluded? You have reason not to buy into this notion that the practices of reporters at the Wall Street Journal are reasonable and trustworthy under most conditions. Something that you and I buy into almost automatically because we've just never had reason to dig deep on it. What if you've been raised in a religious community that puts faith above anything empirical, and that is what you've been told, and you've been rewarded by it, and your whole life is surrounded by people who are that exact sort of persuasion. It's going to be really hard to layer upon that a belief in the empirical as superior.
So what do? How do we create common ground?
Yes.
In a society in which truth is now of contention?
Well, I think we have to go to the emotional again there. We have to remind people that we breathe the same air, that we often breathe the same microbes when they threaten us, that we all suffer when hurricanes hit, that we all suffer when our public schools are defunded, that we actually have connections with other people. It's the emotional reconnecting of people, the expression and valuation that we have a common fate. That's super hard, right? We've been how many thousands of years have we been trying to get that thing done? But I see that as the only way that we can even open up any channel of deliberation that gets us to this other stuff. So I am not optimistic about any of this getting better in the short term. And by the short term, I mean like the few decades I have left, right? I am somewhat optimistic about it getting better over the long term, a couple of millennia, because we've been working at this for a couple of millennia. And there will always be setbacks and always be terrible moments along the way, and collapses and genocides and worse. And yet, we have to keep reminding ourselves that that we do breathe the same air, that we do have a common fate, that we have one planet, and you can use that theme to connect emotionally with some very different people. It's only those who dehumanize others who refuse to accept that notion that we all breathe the same air, that we all have a common fate. And the level, when it flips to dehumanization, I think at that point a person is lost. And I'm not sure that any sort of connection or persuasion will make that much of a difference. So we have to like keep working on those who have yet to be turned to the level of dehumanization.
So one of the things that you talk about is the reward system that social media engages in, and a study out of USC in 2023 asked the question of whether or not that reward system could be changed.
Yeah.
And instead of popularity as the reward system, the number of likes as the reward system on social media, maybe it could be the validity or the truth of your posts. And in this study, that decreased the number of falsehoods that were spread. I wonder if Mark Zuckerberg hired you tomorrow, how would you, and said to you, change the algorithm.
Right.
What would you do?
I mean, so part of the problem is nothing about that change serves Facebook's interest at all. Right?
Yeah.
So,
but let's say that he was willing to set aside all of that.
Not to run a business and
well,
not to satisfy his shareholders. Yeah, that would be. I mean, it's fantasy. But look, this is why we have public institutions, right? This is why we have non-commercial entities. This is why we have libraries. This is why we have universities. This is why we have schools.
And regulations of
right?
these kinds of entities, potentially.
But I don't have to tell you, you can't regulate expression.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is part of the problem. Now, there are parts of the world where they do regulate expression, often detrimentally, but this is not one of them where you can do that. So that the notion of that regulatory intervention happening in this country is out of the question, and in many countries out of the question. That said, remember, Facebook is built so it works for Facebook, and I think it's not fruitful to imagine that incentives are going to change for Facebook to do anything differently than what it does. There was a moment between about 2017 and 2020 when Zuckerberg looked like he was taking a lot of these criticisms seriously. And he did change some things about the experience of Facebook. One of the things he did ultimately, and he thought he had solved the problem, was to dial down the ease of distributing news content. And that's sort of where we are now. So it's really hard to post a news story from any news source and see it echo around Facebook and get more than a handful of likes. He's just basically quelled the distribution of news. He wants Facebook to be about puppies and babies and clubs and interests and all the lovely things in the world, naively. So he's engineering our attention in those directions, thinking he's going to solve the problem. He hasn't, of course, because the world isn't all about Facebook. He hasn't also because Facebook groups don't operate under the same algorithmic governance, and people are gathering in Facebook groups and doing all sorts of nasty things and spreading all sorts of nonsense. And for a variety of other reasons, it's largely failed. But it does mean that when you actually want to promote something important and true and good and helpful, it's really hard right now. You're slogging through molasses on Facebook right now.
Interesting. We saw in August that French authorities arrested Pavel Durov, the Russian founder and CEO of the social media platform Telegram.
Right.
And this is one of the most high-profile attempts to try to hold a leader of a CEO of a social media platform responsible for some of the dangerous content. As I understand it, he was charged with complicity for the distribution of child sexual abuse images, complicity around drug trafficking, and other ways that Telegram, which is a rarely moderated or low moderated, free-form social media platform.
Highly encrypted.
Encrypted.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you make of this? Is this an opportunity for how much does it matter that this has happened?
I think it matters as making an example of somebody, right? So the French government was deeply frustrated with its law enforcement and security services inability to track organized crime through Telegram, which is in many cases the platform of choice for organized crime, especially in connecting with customers, for instance, customers of drugs or customers of human trafficking. And so because it was so frustrated, it thought, well, let's make an example out of Durov. But Telegram is not the only encrypted communication system that's used for these matters. WhatsApp is another one. it's actually better encrypted than Telegram and Signal, right? So Signal and WhatsApp are also really important to many people in the rest of the world. If you live in a country with an authoritarian or totalitarian government, you want to, and we want people in those situations to use encrypted services so that their communication is not susceptible to government surveillance. And yet, so basically, French government shot a warning shot saying we really need to look at all the consequences of these encrypted communication systems. By the way, right, Apple's messaging system right now is also highly encrypted, and so Apple is in this game. The French government, I think smartly and intentionally, went after the most vulnerable, least politically powerful of these services. They weren't going to haul Apple into court. They weren't going to haul Facebook into court or Meta into court, right? So they definitely went after the most susceptible and easily demonized of these services. Telegram is run by bad people, largely for nefarious purposes, but it's also a really important service in former Soviet states, for instance. It's one of the major platforms for communication in Russia, and people who are dissidents against Russia use Telegram too. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this works out. And the question of what law enforcement and security services want to do to unwind strong encryption has been a 25-year battle. It goes back in this country to the Clinton administration. We had a number of efforts by the Clinton administration to head off the installation of strong encryption into communication services, and that failed then. I don't really think in the long run we're going to get rid of these strong encryption systems. There's just too much invested in it, including a lot of the legitimate financial system of the world is invested in that.
So we're 3 weeks out from the national election here. What are you seeing from where you sit? How are you? Neither of us has a crystal ball, but how is social media being used differently by the Harris campaign, by the Trump campaign than we saw in 2016?
Well, both in 2020 and 2016, the Democratic Party is much more savvy than it was in 2016. That doesn't mean that a win is guaranteed by that, but a loss won't be attributable to it.
Yeah.
I will also say that the Trump campaign is a lot less savvy, a lot less professional, a lot weirder, right? A lot more chaotic, a lot less disciplined, because Trump himself is, right? He's clearly lost any grounding in reality and spent 25 minutes dancing last night for reasons no one can figure out. Dancing poorly. If you were a good dancer, that would be something. But but what we are seeing, and this is, I think, quite interesting, is that the Harris campaign has really effectively leveraged TikTok for short messaging, for effective targeting, for viral marketing, and showing a certain humanity, right? A certain levity.
Yeah.
Which, Biden could never get away with, and so there's pleasure attached to the Harris campaign, and not just among the true believers.
Right, the joy thing.
Yeah, and getting back to this question, so much of this really has to be about emotion. As opposed to fact checking. You can't fact check yourself out of fascism. It's just never going to work, right?
Wow.
But having this offer some hope. Mm-hmm. Having this sense that there are multiple ways with which one can identify with the Harris campaign and be motivated by the Harris campaign, both stories of joy and stories of great pain, right? All of the stuff about abortion, all the stuff about reproductive rights, all the stuff about miscarriages is all very strongly out there, including on TikTok. So, of course, this is going to be the last TikTok campaign ever because it will be banned in the United States as of January 1st, thanks to the Biden administration. So this is like the last shot for this sort of stuff to happen. What's likely to happen is what happened in India. When India banned TikTok in 2020, all of those people who were active creators on TikTok in India moved over to Instagram.
Sure.
And Meta was very happy to have them, as Meta will be very happy to have all these U.S. TikTok people.
Yep.
And Meta is really behind the TikTok ban on this. And Meta is deeply embedded with both parties. Your senator Chuck Schumer is the largest recipient of donations from Meta, and his daughter works for Meta. And that's one of the reasons why no serious regulatory efforts have succeeded in the U.S. Senate in recent decades. Yeah.
Wow.
He's actually shut down my own senator, Mark Warner, who has been trying to hold hearings on Meta's problems with national security, and there's been all sorts of problems with that. So, yeah.
Let me turn to a couple questions we got from students.
Sure.
This is just a fascinating conversation, and you and I could talk.
I hope I don't get you in trouble by
No?
talking about Chuck Schumer. Your neighbor, he lives in Brooklyn, so yeah.
It's all good. So these are questions that were submitted.
Yeah.
While serving on the board of the Digital Public Library of America, how has that experience impacted or shaped your career?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Wow, what a sweet question. Yeah, so I wrote a book that came out in 2011 called The Googleization of Everything. And the conclusion of that book was I basically said, why did we so quickly and easily decide that this one company, which had then been around for a very short period of time, be in charge of our cultural heritage, our intellectual collection, right? To give them so much power over what is true and important in the world seemed foolish to me, even if it was so convenient, and I actually thought convenience was a bigger problem than we assumed. And I ended the book by saying, why don't we have a vision of a public service that can connect people to the best resources of information and deliberation, and can really foster something close to a positive, enlightened, and enlightenment-informed system, and have it essentially be run by librarians along with the ethical code of librarians and the professional standards and practices of librarians. We could have and we should have invested all these state resources. And I compared it to the Human Genome Project.
Yeah.
And the Human Genome Project had started out as a multi-government funded global research program to totally take account of the human genome, create a huge database. And a private company came on and said, hey, we've got this shotgun method of establishing the human genome. We're going to do it faster than the public project. So you governments can stop funding all these other scientists. This company, Celera, will do it real fast. A lot like Google, right? They were basically playing the Google game before Google. And for a while, a lot of the governments were saying, well, maybe we just give this up and let Celera do it. But then the scientists all said, but wait, Celera will then control everything and will license everything. So the governments decided, well, we're not going to let Celera do that. And we had essentially a race between the publicly funded program and the private one, and it was a tie. And they ended up publishing their results in Science and Nature in the same month. And the result has been actually beneficial in a tremendous way, and it directly affected the creation of a lot of pharmaceutical products, indirectly affected the development of all of these new vaccines that we're seeing, and has the potential for other great resources, but only because there was a massive multi-government public investment in the common knowledge. What's in our bodies that belongs to all of us, right? So I was basically saying, why shouldn't we do that with our created knowledge? You know, all of our books, for instance. And fortunately, other people had been thinking along the same lines, and a number of foundations and some pretty smart leaders decided to start the Digital Public Library of America. They didn't want to go global. I was thinking global at the time. And there are similar projects in Europe as well. And what they've been able to do is actually pretty remarkable, but it's been done pretty quietly, which is they have been connecting library systems around the country, especially local libraries, so that they can digitize their local collections and make them globally searchable.
Wow.
And so if you're doing genealogical research or you're doing local history research, you don't have to be in those sites all the time. And you can also make connections across different places and different communities and so forth. And so we've not seen any grand breakthroughs in our understanding of our human condition, but it's a great model for how we might build an information ecosystem that isn't all commercial.
That's fantastic to hear. This is about artificial intelligence. As we progress into an era of artificial intelligence, what are some of your takes or viewpoints on how society can both thrive and or diminish with this new addition?
Yeah.
This is about artificial intelligence.
So artificial intelligence is neither. It is neither artificial nor intelligent. It's not artificial because it's all part of what we call a socio-technical system. Artificial intelligence, as we know it, all of these systems that are sold that way, labeled that way, are that way because of our constant interaction with them. So we are training the data that then, that we are changing the data and creating the data that trains these systems to then recognize patterns, make predictions, and create new either computer code or text or sound or images. And so it's a constant conversation between human and machine all along the way. So that's why it's not really artificial. But it's also not intelligent because intelligence implies some sort of judgment, some sort of decision that something is more important than another thing or better than another thing. And all that artificial intelligence, poor phrase, can do is judge what is more common among the patterns that they recognize, right? So that actually isn't all that new. That's how search algorithms have been working for 25 years. That is how the algorithms that drive Facebook and Instagram have been working as well. TikTok is the best example of this, which is why TikTok learns your interests so quickly and feeds up so much more that you want, like better than any other service. So what we call artificial intelligence now, the generative stuff, the ChatGPT, the Wall-E, that's just another extra feature laid upon the same basic technology that we've been seeing commercialized for 25 years that we've all been interacting with without knowing that it was the same thing and calling it artificial intelligence. That said, I have two concerns. One is that if we lean on and learn to be dependent on these services to create text, images, sound for us more and more, it not only makes us perhaps lazier in those faculties, which makes me sound really grumpy, but I think it's a legitimate concern. We become less sharp in our own skills because writing is thinking, singing is thinking, you know. Those are important faculties that we have as human beings that we engage in individually and collectively, and it's part of what makes life joyful, but also part of what makes us better at doing what we do constantly. And if we have this service upon which we're dependent and we trust so completely, we're getting into the same bad relationship we were in and are in with Google, but 10 times worse because it's about what gets created, not just what is found. So that's one of my concerns. Beyond that, I have much bigger concerns, but they're not the science fiction concerns that you might read about that all the big AI scientists are warning us about, that the machines will take over and serve their own interests and blah, 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 and all of a sudden we're living in the Matrix. And I think that's all a grand distraction. I actually fear the technologies that have been deployed for the last decade, like predictive policing. So just to pick on Los Angeles, although it's true in New York too, predictive policing algorithms, these proprietary systems, use historical data to try to advise police on where to concentrate patrols. Unsurprisingly, the historical data we have in Los Angeles is not so nice to some communities and might not actually be serving the interests of the larger community, or specifically not the highly policed communities, in ways that are optimal because they're reflecting the behavior of humans over the past 40 years that has all been generated and rendered in this data set that is now training the algorithms. Similar systems are being used for sentencing guidelines in states like Wisconsin, where if you have certain attributes, you are likely to get a higher sentence because the computer is predicting you have a much higher rate of recidivism. Surprise, surprise, black men from certain neighborhoods in Milwaukee have statistically higher chance of recidivism than people in other parts of the state, and they're getting bigger sentences, right? And for some reason, the state of Wisconsin sees nothing wrong with this, and we are not allowed to look into the proprietary systems. They're protected by contract, and we can't know what standards are totally opaque, and they're affecting human lives.
Right.
And what we've seen in the last year that is even more frightening and more immediate is missile targeting systems that are run with or by AI systems. Right. And again, totally opaque systems. We know that it's happening, We know that it's being used around the world. We know that it's being used, for instance, in Lebanon today. We just don't know what kind of systems are being used, how they're being used, how they're being tested, how effective they are, and we cannot then judge whether these things are appropriate because they're not only protected by proprietary contracts, they're protected by national security laws and secrets as well. So that's some really dangerous outsourcing of human judgment. And the practice of outsourcing human judgment is, I think, the original sin in all of this.
It's so interesting to think about artificial intelligence as not artificial and not intelligent because it doesn't have judgment.
Right.
And yet we're farming to it judgment calls.
And it's not about students cheating in my class as much as that bugs me. It's about someone getting harassed by police on the street when they need not be. Is this room haunted?
Possibly.
Or is that Senator Schumer exhibiting his power, all of us? So. Or Elon Musk, who knows, right? Yes.
Look, this has been such a fascinating conversation.
Oh, thank you.
And I really want to thank you for it. Can we give a round of applause?
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I was facing away from everybody on that side of the room. So, yeah. Hi.
Everyone will have a chance to say hi and to have some comments with Siva of your own. We have a reception right around the corner in the Occidental Room. But I just want to mention before you go that on November 13th, we're going to have the next presidential lecture series with Amina Mohammed, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and also the chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation. I really want you to note that, and hopefully you can come back. Siva, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Look
Thank you very much.
Seeing you all.
Great.